Perhaps one of the most extreme and terrifying aspects of World War I was tunnel warfare. It was trench warfare taken to another level of danger, horror, and suffering. A form of combat that eventually led to some of the largest non-nuclear explosions ever created. Despite how dramatic it was, this subject has remained surprisingly overlooked. Today, we are going to change that. You are about to discover what happened when opposing tunnels unexpectedly met beneath no man's land, and just how horrifying the underground war truly became. With the arrival of quick-firing artillery and machine guns, World War I quickly became trapped in trench warfare. The most advanced armies in the world were not prepared for how rapidly weapons had evolved. Old tactics were no longer effective, and hundreds of thousands of lives were lost before this reality fully became clear. What we now call trench warfare emerged as armies desperately dug into the earth to protect themselves from these new weapons. But this defensive approach created an even bigger problem. Once the Western Front stretched from the North Sea to the Swiss border, neither side could find a way to break through enemy lines. The war became a stalemate. Two opposing forces facing each other, constantly bombarding one another, and repeatedly failing to achieve a decisive breakthrough. Attempts to charge across no man's land quickly proved ineffective. After repeated failures, soldiers began looking for more creative ways to outmaneuver the enemy. One solution came from ancient siege warfare. If attacking over the top could not succeed, perhaps attacking from below could. The idea was simple in theory. Dig a tunnel beneath the enemy's position, plant large quantities of explosives, and detonate them without warning. But as often happens in war, reality proved far more complicated. Tunneling may have seemed like an excellent solution, but it would soon evolve into something far darker than anyone expected. In 1914, during the early months of trench warfare, German forces were the first to demonstrate how effective underground attacks could be. In Flanders, near Ypres, German engineers secretly dug tunnels beneath British lines. They placed 10 small mines, each containing roughly 50 kilograms of explosives, directly beneath an Indian brigade's trenches. When the charges were detonated simultaneously, the explosions devastated the entire area. German infantry quickly advanced, taking advantage of the shock created by the blasts. Within minutes, the position had been overrun. More than 800 soldiers were killed in the surprise attack. Although this was not a decisive moment in the war, it shocked Allied commanders and exposed a new threat they had no immediate answer to. At the same time, the French had begun smaller mining operations along the Somme. But no army yet possessed tunneling capabilities equal to the Germans. That situation would soon change. Almost immediately after witnessing the effectiveness of underground attacks, every major army began developing its own tunneling tactics. The underground war had begun. Mining operations were divided into two primary objectives: offensive mining, digging toward enemy lines to place explosive charges, and countermining, detecting and stopping enemy tunnels before they reached their targets. British commanders quickly realized they needed experts. Who better to dig tunnels than professional miners? Civilian workers who had constructed underground railways in London became known as the famous clay kickers. Their experience allowed the Allies to form specialized tunneling units capable of breaking the trench deadlock. By 1915, the British Army had formed its first 8 tunneling companies within the Royal Engineers. These units included regular soldiers, coal miners, sewer workers, and anyone with underground construction experience. Some recruits were taken directly from coal mines and transported to the front within days. Soon, more than 30 tunneling companies were operating beneath the Western Front. over 21,000 men were involved in underground operations. Canada, Australia, and New Zealand also formed tunneling units. Meanwhile, French and German forces continued expanding their own underground warfare capabilities. Combat was now taking place beneath the battlefield, creating a unique form of horror rarely seen in warfare. One of the first large-scale tests of British tunneling came at Hill 60 near Ypres. Royal Engineers placed 6 massive mines beneath heavily defended German positions. When the explosives detonated simultaneously, the hill was torn apart. British infantry quickly captured what remained of the destroyed defences. Although the Germans later recaptured the position, the effectiveness of the explosions encouraged further tunnelling operations. By the end of 1915, underground warfare had intensified across the Western Front. Although the Germans began first, British tunnelling techniques soon became more advanced. One key innovation was clay kicking. This technique was especially effective in the clay soil of Flanders. British tunnellers dug deep shafts until they reached stable clay layers approximately 30 meters below the surface. From there, tunnels were extended horizontally toward enemy positions. The digging angle allowed water to drain away from the working area. Clay kicking involved a 3-man team working in complete silence. One man loosened the soil using a specialized tool operated with his feet. Another collected the excavated clay. A third transported the material out of the tunnel and brought back wooden supports. Because the process produced very little noise, it was much harder for the enemy to detect. Clay also transmitted less sound than other soil types. British tunnellers could advance approximately 8 meters per day. German tunnellers typically managed only 2. Wooden supports were carefully installed without nails or hammering. The pieces fit together tightly, and moisture caused the wood to expand, locking the structure into place. Every detail had to be considered to survive underground. Even disposing of excavated soil created danger. If enemy observers saw unusual clay appearing in sandbags, they could detect nearby mining operations. Areas suspected of tunneling often received heavy artillery bombardment. Working underground was extremely dangerous. Tunnels were narrow, dark, wet, and unstable. Soldiers faced constant risk of collapse, gas poisoning, flooding, or enemy countermining explosions. Many described the tunnels as feeling like a coffin filled with humidity. Small animals were sometimes used to detect poisonous gases. If the animals showed signs of distress, the men knew they had to evacuate immediately. Sometimes tunnel entrances were destroyed by artillery fire. Entire groups of soldiers were buried alive underground. In some cases, hundreds of men remained trapped forever beneath the battlefield. Occasionally, enemy tunnels would intersect. When this happened, close combat followed in total darkness. Firearms were difficult to use in such confined spaces. Tunnelers often fought using knives, pistols, or even their digging tools. These encounters were brutal and extremely terrifying. By 1916, underground warfare had reached unprecedented levels of intensity. Explosive charges became larger, more powerful, and more destructive. At the Battle of Messines Ridge in 1917, after 18 months of preparation, 21 massive mines were detonated beneath German positions. Approximately 450 tons of explosives were used. Within seconds, the entire ridge was lifted into the air. Thousands of soldiers were killed instantly. The landscape itself was permanently altered. Some mines were never detonated. One even exploded decades later after being struck by lightning. Crater formations from these explosions still exist today in Belgium, a reminder of the hidden war fought beneath the surface. Tunnel warfare showed just how far humanity was willing to go to defeat its enemies, even if that meant fighting and dying in complete darkness beneath the earth.